We are now going to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be given up to the foreign power, to be mocked and flogged and crucified, and on the third day he will be raised to life again.
Today, thousands of pilgrims commemorate Jesus' arrival to Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. According to the scriptures, when Jesus entered the city, he already knew the fate that would befall him. He told his disciples he was to die on the cross. The true cross on which Jesus was crucified is now lost, but some claim that pieces of it are still in existence.
If I could know for sure, for historically sure, that we had a piece of the true cross, it would make me happy, yes. And I would regard it as the most precious of all possible relics.
This film traces the history of the true cross of Jesus. New evidence and archaeological facts, along with folklore and myth, reveal the story of the true cross. Where could it be? What really happened to the true cross of Jesus? Carrying his own cross and flogged by Roman soldiers, Jesus made his way along these streets. This is the traditional way of the cross. Thousands of pilgrims follow the route of Jesus each year during Good Friday on the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Agony. The last stations of the cross are here in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The church was built on top of the rock known as Golgotha, the place of the skull. It is said that here Jesus was crucified and his cross was found 300 years later. Rumors indicate that fragments of the cross that touch the body of Jesus are still hidden inside vaults in the basements of the church. We are told that only a few priests are given access to the remains of this holiest of relics in the Holy Sepulchre Church. After Jesus was crucified, the symbol of the cross became the physical manifestation of the most important event in the birth of Christianity. Today, millions of crosses adorn the tops of churches and Christian institutions around the world. Yet the early Christians did not mention the cross, and there is no evidence of crosses being used as a religious symbol until the 4th century, after the Roman Empire adopted Christianity. The first evidence of crosses being used as a symbol is found in the ruins of Byzantine monasteries from the early 5th century, like this one at Mamshit in the Negev desert. During the time of Jesus, the cross was used as a tool of torture and execution. Such negative connotations did not convey the ideas of a new faith based on love and tolerance. The followers of Christ were mainly Jews from the Galilee. Because of their fear of persecution, the early Christians didn't use the cross as a symbol of their faith, but turned to other more peaceful images, such as the fish, the dove. These were meaningful, but not incriminating.
Crucifixion was such a disgraceful death that the official line was that Jesus died. Paul, in fact, is the only one to emphasize that he died by crucifixion, that there was a cross, that there was a lot of blood, because he wanted to emphasize the enormity of the sacrifice. But the interest in the wood of the cross or reliquaries at that period, none.
According to the legends, the story of the true cross begins long before the crucifixion. Some of the most important references about the early history of the true cross can be found here in Arezzo, Italy, a small, sleepy town in the region of Tuscany. Inside this simple church of San Francesco, early Renaissance painter Piero della Francesca picked up his brush and told the stories and beliefs about the true cross that grew up in the Middle Ages. Della Francesca, depicted in this self-portrait, was inspired by the influential text based on the cross called The Golden Legend, written by a Franciscan monk in the 13th century. It is a rich text that recounts the miraculous story of the wood of Jesus' cross. The first fresco of the cycle tells the story of Adam's death. As Adam's death was approaching, he begged his son Seth to bring him some relief from the Garden of Eden. The archangel Michael gave Seth a branch from the tree of knowledge, but Adam died before Seth got back, so Seth planted the branch at the head of Adam's grave. A tree grew up on that spot, which eventually became the tree used in the crucifixion of Jesus. This link between Adam and Jesus through the cross may sound like an odd coincidence, but it has theological significance.
The cross of Christ has relationship to Adam, in that through a tree, Adam fell from paradise. Through Adam, his partaking of a tree which had forbidden fruit, he fell from paradise. And through a tree, man again finds paradise. In other words, through the tree, which became the cross of Christ, again, salvation is open, and the doors of paradise are again open for man to enter.
It is here at the Monastery of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem that it is traditionally believed the seed was planted for the tree from which the cross of Jesus was made.
From the water of this area, from the ground of this area, with nature's way, it became a tree which would eventually become the cross of Jesus Christ.
Popular interpretations suggest that the cross was made of olive wood. There is evidence that olive trees have been grown continuously in the valley of the cross that surrounds the monastery since the time of Jesus. But would an olive tree actually be strong enough to support the body of a man being crucified?
Whether or not they used olive trees for crucifixion, I would seriously doubt it. The reason is if you look at olive trees today, olive trees are very short, and the reason that they're so short is that they have to, for agricultural reasons, they have to be pruned. If you don't prune an olive tree, then they go up and up and up, which would be good for crucifixion, but it's no good for olives. I think the olive trees was probably one of the least suitable trees used. What's interesting about that is that many people know the story about the Valley of the Cross, which says basically that's where the wood for Jesus' cross was taken from. What we're talking about is a 6th century Byzantine monastery, but the legend which ties that monastery with the cross of Jesus comes 1,000 years later, in the 16th century. And I find it very interesting that 1,000 years after the monastery had been in existence, somebody decided to come up with this beautiful story. It's a nice story, but is it historically accurate? I doubt it.
Archaeologist Vasilios Tsaferis was once a priest at the monastery. He has researched the legends and found that although most of the stories have never been proven in fact, they provide the only known history of the cross.
This opening over here, according to the legend or to tradition, this is the place where the tree of the cross grew up. And this is the story.
The Greek Orthodox version of the legend of the cross is painted on the walls of the Church of the Holy Cross. According to Greek Orthodox tradition, the story of the cross begins with Lot, Abraham's brother. When Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, Lot abandoned the city and sinned with his daughters. According to the legend, he then went to his brother Abraham to ask him how he could be purged of his sin. Abraham had been visited by 3 angels who announced the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. They left 3 sticks in his tent. Abraham gave these sticks to Lot and told him to plant them and give them water from the river Jordan. If a tree would bloom from these sticks, God would forgive Lot's sins.
Lot, according to the legend, was supposed to bring water from Jordan, but the devil was always trying to prevent to bring the water, because he was knowing what could happen to the tree, to these sticks, and he was always appearing as the thirsty man on the way of Lot, and he was drinking his water. But finally, when he succeeded to bring some water and he watered the sticks, they bloom into kind of tree with 3 sort of trees: the cedar, the bros, and the pine.
The Greek Orthodox tradition tells us that the tree was cut down in the days of King Solomon, and the intention was to use it as a beam in Solomon's temple. But the beam didn't fit, and it was thrown away as a damned beam. In the time of Jesus, this damned beam was recovered, and out of it, the cross of Jesus was made. The Golden Legend also associates the wood of Jesus' cross with the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. King Solomon cut down the tree from his grove to use in the building of the temple, but the beam was eventually discarded and was used as a footbridge over a small stream. When the Queen of Sheba came to Jerusalem to pay her respects to the king, she discovered the bridge. When it was divinely revealed to her what the final use for this wood would be, she knelt in reverence. Solomon heard of Sheba's reverence and began to fear for the kingdom of the Jews should the purpose of the wood be discovered. To protect his people, he had the footbridge removed and the wood buried. Hundreds of years later, the wood of the cross floated up to the surface of the pool of Bethesda at the time of Jesus' trial. This scene is depicted by the medieval painter Agnolo Gaddi. Here the carpenters are building the cross from the wood which was found in the pool of Bethesda. It was here that Jesus healed the cripple, saying to him,
"Rise, take up your pallet, and walk."
Nearby is the Church of St. Anne, and not far from here is the site of Jesus' arrest and trial.
Afuera Jesús para crucificarlo. Padre nuestro que estás en el cielo.
This stone floor of the Praetorium was originally part of a street from the time of Jesus. From here begins the way of the cross. Flogged by Roman soldiers, Jesus carried his cross to the site of the crucifixion, believed to be in the Holy Sepulchre Church. He was crucified on a small hill called Golgotha, the place of the skull. The bare rock can still be seen inside the church in a chapel that commemorates the site of the crucifixion.
And when they came to the place which is called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right and one on the left.
Because of the immense impact they had on the world, the last days of Jesus have always been an object of fascination. Special dramatizations of Jesus' last days are performed every Easter. Here in Manila, every year a few Christians are chosen to emulate their Savior. This tradition of reenacting the Passion has spread to all corners of the world. Believers would still do anything to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. Throughout the Roman Empire, crucifixion was a common method of execution for criminals and traitors. Crucifixions took place every day. No records were left from Roman times of how crucifixion was actually implemented. For centuries, artists created their own interpretations of the crucifixion. Opinions varied as to how Jesus was attached to the cross. The most popular representation of Jesus is with nails through the palm of his hands and his feet crossed at the ankles. But studies have shown that the human body could not be supported in this manner.
I don't know whether nails were always used or not. I think not. And see, if you don't use nails, the agony can last longer. And it was quite agonizing because you could hang there for sometimes days, and what killed you finally was not so much the pain or the lack of food and drink, but the doctors say, the pressure on your chest to keep pumping oxygen in when you're hanging there, and eventually you died of asphyxiation.
According to tradition, Jesus was nailed to the cross.
If you look at Christian art, Jesus is the only one that's nailed. The good thief and the bad thief are always tied. In the New Testament, it simply says they crucified him, end of sentence. It doesn't say 3 nails, 4 nails, 2 nails. The other thing is that you have to realize that there have been a lot of experiments carried out since the 1940s which show that it's impossible to crucify a person in the traditional manner which we see in Christian art. For example, it's impossible to crucify through the hands. The body simply cannot be supported. You can do it through the wrist, but personally I feel that most people probably in antiquity got tied to crosses.
Since the 1940s, experimental research has been carried out to discover exactly how crucifixions were performed. Students were even hung on a cross in all kinds of ways to determine which were the most likely to have been used in Roman times. A momentous discovery in a burial tomb near Jerusalem led to the first archaeological evidence of crucifixion. The bones of a man who had been nailed to a cross were found.
In 1968, they discovered here in Jerusalem the remains of a young Jewish man who was crucified around the time of Christ. And what was interesting about it is that until today, it's the only direct evidence of crucifixion in the world. What happened was that this poor fellow, what we have here is a nail, an iron nail, which is coming from the outside of the foot. They drove it through a piece of wood. We can still see the wood here after 2,000 years, traces of the wood, which is olive wood. It then entered the heel. It then went out, and then when it went into the tree, it probably struck a knot. When it struck a knot in the tree, what happened was that it fish hooked. It got bent, and it was impossible then to go and remove it from the person's leg. They took a piece of wood, they drove a nail through it. Once they drove the nail through it to go and increase the head of the diameter, they then drove it through the foot of this individual. And this was the manner on the right leg in which this person was crucified.
After his crucifixion, the body of Jesus was taken down from the cross. His body was laid here on the stone of unction and prepared for burial.
Then he took it down and wrapped it in a linen shroud, and laid him in a rock-hewn tomb where no one had ever yet been laid.
Although no one today knows where the original tomb of Jesus was, this shrine in the church remembers the place where his body rested for 3 days. The events of the next few days became the foundation of a new religion. Jesus' resurrection gave his followers the faith to spread his teachings around the world. A controversial discovery in Jerusalem revealed 4 burial ossuaries from the time of Jesus, believed by some to be the tombs of the Holy Family.
An inscription which might say here, Jesus, the son of Joseph.
Engraved on one of the ossuaries seems to be the name Jesus, son of Joseph. On another, the name Maria is clearly engraved, and on the third, Joseph.
The other one is Yosef, which is Yosef. All of them are in Hebrew, 4 ossuaries of one tomb.
According to historians, these were common names in Jesus' time, and their appearance together could be just a coincidence.
Everything is possible. To my mind, the chances that this is the family is very, very low.
This is not proven.
This is not have proven, and I think the person who says that this is the family has to prove it.
The bones that were found in the coffins were buried, according to Jewish law, in a secret grave site. If indeed the bones of Jesus rested in this coffin, it would put the idea of his resurrection into question.
If the body of Jesus were still in the tomb, if there were no empty tomb, you could still believe correctly in the resurrection, because in the creeds of Christendom, in all the creeds of Christendom, and in 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul talks at length about the resurrection, he and the creeds never mention the empty tomb. See? So the risen Christ would not be identical with his corpse. The resurrection is not exactly a resuscitated corpse.
The true cross of Jesus had been discarded, and it disappeared, only to be discovered hundreds of years later. The story begins here in Rome in the 4th century, when Constantine, a Roman emperor with a spiritual mind, came to power, and Christianity was once again able to flourish. Constantine's commitment to Christianity is closely associated with his rise to power. It was his victory in 313 at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge near Rome that formed the foundation of his faith. Asleep on the eve of the battle, he saw in a dream a luminous cross in the heavens, bearing the words, "In hoc signo vinces," in this sign, conquer. Constantine had dreamed of a victory with no bloodshed, under the symbol of the cross. It so impressed him, he took the cross into battle with him, beating his rival Maxentius with ease. It is said that not a single drop of blood was shed. One of his first acts after his victory was to prohibit crucifixion as capital punishment throughout the empire. Constantine's prophetic dream would prove to have far-reaching consequences. The following year, he converted to Christianity and ordained Christianity to be the religion of the entire Roman Empire. Constantine's devotion to Christianity was also highly influenced by his mother, Queen Helena. He showered her with affection, and in 326, Queen Helena arrived in Jerusalem in an attempt to locate the authentic location of the crucifixion. Today, most Christians believe that the true site of the crucifixion was in the Holy Sepulchre Church, within the walls of the old city of Jerusalem.
Helena comes out to Jerusalem on pilgrimage, and she asks the local Christian bishop where the site of the crucifixion and the resurrection were. And he takes her to this built-over area where I believe there had been a pagan temple to the goddess Venus. We regard this as the site of the Holy Sepulchre.
It is widely accepted that the crucifixion took place on this site. It had only been 300 years since the actual event took place when Queen Helena found the site and built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Yet this location is disputed by most Protestants. They believe that the site of the resurrection was here in the garden tomb, outside of the city walls. This fits the biblical description. This rock nearby is believed to be the site of the crucifixion, and surprisingly resembles the form of a skull. For Queen Helena, this empty space would have been more convenient to build the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
We regard this as an argument for the authenticity of the site of the Holy Sepulchre, namely that if they wanted to lie, or if they didn't know, or if they didn't have a strong local tradition of where it was, and they just went for convenience, nearby was a kind of open space where they could have much more conveniently built it.
By the order of the Emperor Constantine, the pagan temple was destroyed, and a huge basilica was built on the site. During the construction, wooden crosses were found by the builders. The Archbishop of Jerusalem immediately reported to the emperor about this incredible find. Legend, however, paints the history of the discovery of the cross differently. Here, Helena is the one responsible for the search and the finding of the cross. The Golden Legend tells us that in her search for the true cross, Empress Helena found a Jew named Judas who knew of its location. He refused to tell her, so she had him thrown in an empty well and starved him. As depicted by Piero della Francesca, Judas directed Helena and her entourage to a temple within the city walls dedicated to Venus. Helena ordered the temple demolished so the digging could begin in search of the holy wood. 20 fathoms down into the ground, 3 crosses were found. According to one story, the true cross was identified by the inscription that was written on it. Another story says that they tried placing the crosses one by one over the body of a dead woman. Nothing happened until the final cross touched the woman's body, and she was resurrected, a clear sign that this was the true cross of Jesus. Queen Helena is considered by local Christians to be the first archaeologist of the Holy Land, but modern archaeologists doubt that Helena could have found the true cross.
I think it's very, very naive to go and assume that on that day they made 3 crosses and they crucified 3 men and then they threw them in a water cistern, and then Queen Helena found them 400 years later. You have to realize that those crosses that those men were crucified on that day have been used again and again and again and again.
This stairway leads down to the most important remainder of the original basilica. Called the Chapel of the Invention of the Cross, it is in this spot Helena is said to have found the crosses of Jesus and the 2 thieves. When the true cross was identified, it was divided into 3 pieces. One was sent back to Constantinople, another was sent to Rome, and the third remained here in Jerusalem. To commemorate the finding of the true cross, a feast day was declared, similar to what we see here. Every year in early May, the relic was brought out to be venerated at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. After Mass, pilgrims were invited to kiss the wood. As ancient and similar to the veneration of the cross, the most spectacular of the ceremonies celebrated in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is the annual Miracle of the Holy Fire. Thousands of ecstatic worshipers anxiously await the fire that descends from heaven directly into the tomb of Jesus. After it is released, they rush forward to share in its light. Documents from the 4th century describe the celebration of the veneration of the cross.
The only hint at that period of how big it was, or what remained in about when Nigeria saw it in 384, was in order to stop pilgrims stealing bits of the wood, the bishop put it on a table and he sat with his hands on the two ends. So you'd assume a block of material, you know, about maybe almost a meter long.
The discovery of the true cross was the most important discovery in Christian history. So influential was this finding that among the Eastern Orthodox, Byzantine Emperor Constantine and his mother Helena are now venerated along with the cross. The Christians of Jerusalem remained prosperous and at peace for almost 3 centuries. But the tables turned with a brutal attack by the Persians under King Khosroes in 614. Their aim was to wipe out all traces of Christianity in the Holy City. Thousands of the faithful were slaughtered. Churches were pillaged and burned. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre was especially hard hit.
When the Persians came through, they stole the relic of the Holy Cross, the main relic that was here, a big chunk. And the Christians felt this was a disaster.
Khosroes was prepared to destroy the true cross, but his wife, herself a Christian, convinced him against it. Instead, he brought it back to his palace. Khosroes started a new religion, making himself a god. He put the cross next to his throne, representing the Son in the Holy Trinity, and since the dove represents the Holy Spirit, he replaced it with a rooster. The Christians of Byzantium could not tolerate the thought of the true cross and Jerusalem being under the control of non-Christians. From Constantinople, the emperor at the time, Heraclius, set out in the 620s to recapture territory from the Persians. In 627, he and his men met Khosroes and his army in a fierce battle on the plains of Nineveh. Heraclius is victorious. Here we see Khosroes being beheaded. This icon in the Church of the Holy Cross depicts the return of the cross to Jerusalem. Heraclius himself brought the sacred relic back to Jerusalem. Legend tells that when he arrived adorned as a king, suddenly the stones of the Golden Gate joined together like a wall. According to the legend of the true cross, the angel of the Lord then appeared on the gate, saying, "When the King of heaven went to his passion by this gate, he was not arrayed like a king, but came humbly on an ass." Here we see Heraclius' arrival. In Agnolo Gaddi's painting, we see Heraclius on his horse, humbly carrying in the cross. Gaddi painted only a partial cross in Heraclius' hand because, according to the story, 300 years earlier, Helena had cut the wood of the cross into 3 pieces. Piero della Francesca, however, wants to show the cross in all its magnificence and ignores this important element in the story by painting the cross whole. Having the true cross in Christian hands was imperative to the believer as a potential vehicle for the divine. From this time on, the Byzantines carried the holy wood with them into battle as a symbol of their faith and devotion.
The Orthodox armies, whether in Byzantium or in Greece or in Russia, right through the First World War, when they would go into battle, the priests would carry an icon of the Holy Cross. This is preserved in great music in Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture. The Russian side represented by this hammering motif, bum pum pum pa 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 da 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 ta ta ta, and that's the antiphon of the Holy Cross, because the priests with the Russian army are carrying the icons of the Holy Cross into battle.
Shortly after Heraclius' triumphant return to Jerusalem with the true cross, the swift horsemen of Arabia rode in. They wrested away the entire southern Mediterranean seaboard, including the shores of Palestine. Jerusalem was defeated. Once again, the balance of power was changed in the Holy City. Unlike previous conquerors, the Muslims took the reins of power without shedding any blood. At first, religious sites and churches were left intact. The situation became worse for pilgrims who came from the West in the late 9th and early 10th centuries, as they were barred from the holy places. The stories these pilgrims brought back with them to the church began a religious ferment to free the Holy Land. In 1012, the mad Muslim Caliph al-Hakim ordered the destruction of all non-Muslim sanctuaries. Once again, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was leveled. The true cross, kept in the lower levels of the church, is said to have been spared in the destruction. The Christians of Europe were calling for a crusade to redeem the site of the Holy Cross.
The Crusades were essentially launched to recover the possibility of Western Christians coming on pilgrimage to the Holy Sepulchre, the place, therefore, of the crucifixion and the place of the relic of the Holy Cross. It was considered offensive and a scandal that this holiest of Christian sites should be in Muslim hands.
The call to crusade suddenly became a call for a collective act of penance, a panacea for the needs and woes of an entire generation. And the cross was the symbol under which they fought, in the name of God.
The Crusaders wore a cross in red on their cloaks, and when they went off on crusade, they were blessed by the bishop with the sign of the cross.
By the spring of 1097, 4 large armies had concentrated at Constantinople. After 2 years of battle in the region, they finally reached Jerusalem. On June 7th, 1099, the Crusaders laid siege to Jerusalem. By the 15th of July, the Muslims could no longer hold out under the pressure. The Crusader Knights tasted their sweetest victory. The Holy Sepulchre and the true cross of Jesus were back in Christian hands.
When the Crusaders came to Jerusalem, the Greek Orthodox priests hid the cross. They didn't want to give it to the Latins. And then only after torture, they revealed where they hid the cross. And since then, the true cross became the major relic that they took to all the battles.
The Crusades did not end with the capture of Jerusalem. The Knights had a mission to Christianize the entire region. The relic of the true cross became the battle standard of the Crusaders and was carried by the Patriarch of Jerusalem in front of the troops to inspire the warriors in battle. They were rarely defeated for over 100 years. When the Crusaders nearly lost one battle, it was attributed to the fact that they didn't have the cross with them. Under Crusader rule, Jerusalem was Christianized, and the symbol of the cross heralded the top of the golden Dome of the Rock. By the end of the 12th century, the new leader of the Muslim army was determined to shake the Crusaders' hold on the Holy Land. Saladin was a gifted statesman, and in the eyes of the great masses of Islam, he represented the embodiment of Muslim virtues. To the Muslim leader, the war he was waging against the Christians was also holy. In 1187, Saladin took definitive steps to quash the Crusader Knights. In the blazing heat of the Middle Eastern summer, the Crusaders met Saladin's army here, just outside Tiberias.
They slowly moved towards Tiberias, but the Muslims forced them to withdraw to a crop of rocks called the Horns of Hattin. And then there was the last battle, because the knights could not do anything without their horses, and the heavy iron armor killed them in the heat of summer.
Rather than waiting in their protected enclaves for Saladin to back down, they set out towards the Sea of Galilee to rescue the besieged city. 20,000 men set out on the 2nd of July in full armor despite the excruciating heat. They would find no water until they reached the sea. The hot and thirsty Crusaders were no match for the Muslim warriors, who had set fire to the brush around them. When the smoke thinned, the Crusaders threw down their weapons and laid themselves at the mercy of their captors. The cross was lowered by Muslim hands.
There's a beautiful illuminated manuscript depicting Guy de Lusignan, the Crusader king, facing Saladin, and Saladin is holding the true cross and snatching it from the hands of Guy de Lusignan.
The true cross was in the hands of the Muslims. The Crusaders felt that the symbol of their triumph was gone. Their presence in the Holy Land was in jeopardy. Within months, the Holy Land was conquered by the Muslims, and the Crusaders were pushed to the shores of Tyre in Lebanon. There, they prepared for their next crusade to save the Holy Cross. Led by Richard the Lionheart, the Crusaders laid siege to the city of Akko. The Muslims were almost defeated. Negotiations for the Holy Cross began.
It was then in the Akko region, because we know that the negotiators of Richard the Lionheart were permitted to venerate the true cross when they went to negotiate with Saladin in August of 1191. And then Richard blew it. You see, he slaughtered over 2,000 Arab prisoners, and so the negotiations were broken off. In that following November, Richard brings up the question again with Saladin, and again the negotiations are broken off.
It took the Crusaders and their Muslim conquerors years of negotiation to settle their disputes over the Holy Land. Richard the Lionheart asked Saladin for the return of the true cross.
To you, it is nothing but a piece of wood, but it's very precious in our eyes, and if the Sultan will graciously give it into our hands, we will make peace.
Saladin rejected the Crusaders' request. During the Fifth Crusade, the Muslims agreed to give the true cross back to its rightful owners.
In 1219, the Fifth Crusade is besieging Damietta in the delta of Egypt, and the Sultan al-Kamil, if the Crusaders will leave Egypt, offers them the true cross, Jerusalem, central Palestine. They refuse. They think they can win. Several months later, it's clear no one is going to win. There are new negotiations. Al-Kamil again offers the true cross. It's accepted by the Crusaders. But then when the Muslims go to look for it, they can't find it. And that's the end of the story.
Opinions vary as to where the Sultan took the true cross. Some say it was taken to Damascus and placed under the steps of the largest mosque in the city. There, the feet of every passerby would tread upon the true cross, bringing renewed humiliation to the Christian faith. The main part of the cross disappeared, but small portions of it still remained in the form of relics. By early medieval times, Christians began collecting relics with an intensity never before known. Merchants were making their fortunes selling phony bones and cloth from the garments of saints and wood from the cross of Jesus to believing Christians who hoped to benefit from their healing powers. Small portions of the wood of the true cross, often set in reliquaries covered in gold and gems, were sold to those who could afford them.
The oldest reliquary that we have from the Middle Ages is dated rather precisely to 1130. And it's in the form of a gold cross with 2 bars, I presume to distinguish it from an ordinary crucifix. It's 23 centimeters high, and it is gold wrapped around a wooden frame, and into that wooden frame were stuck slivers which were taken from the relic of the true cross in Jerusalem.
Many churches around the world claim to have pieces of the true cross in their possession. This powerful relic meant money and prestige. To Christians, no relic could be more powerful or valuable than a piece of the true cross. The wood that remains today is the only relic that could actually have touched the body of Jesus. When real relics could not be found to venerate, every kind of fraud was perpetuated.
It's been alleged that there's probably as many pieces of the cross around as to build Noah's Ark. Somebody decided to look at this, and they found out that if you look at all the churches that claim that they have parts of the true cross, there's about enough wood for 1 cross. So there isn't as much wood around as people suspected.
Deep in the basement of the Holy Sepulchre Church, beneath the site of the crucifixion, some pieces of the true cross are kept in a secret vault. This is the most valuable relic of the Greek Orthodox Church, and it is rarely presented in public. It is believed that the biggest piece of the cross in existence today is kept here.
This one, small piece, from here to here, from here to here. And this one, big piece. From here to here. Yes.
Really, the piece of the Holy Cross of Jesus.
That's how it is.
From this cross?
Its origin, priests explain, is from the part of the cross brought back to Jerusalem by the Emperor Heraclius after defeating the Persians. Inside their personal crosses, the priests keep sawdust from the wood of the cross, which is said to have healing power.
Small.
Very small.
I myself was in a hospital visit just a few days ago with a woman who had a piece of the true cross, and while she was sleeping, I crossed her with this. And during the second time that I made the cross, she became awake like this, without touching her, just doing it in the air above her.
For some, The value of the cross of Jesus will always transcend its physical existence. Whether or not more relics of the cross will be discovered is far less important than what the cross represents to the faithful. Some say that to find the true cross of Jesus, one need not look further than the heart of any Christian believer.
I took one with officer in Greece, Greek officer in the army, which was in a war for 1940. And they say they shoot him, and a bullet hit the cross and come back, not kill him. And he give this to the Holy Cross because he was inside the, that's what he say. Yeah, he had a Holy Cross inside, and then it protected him from to be killed.